On the morning of December 7, 1941, 353 Japanese aircraft launched from 6 aircraft carriers to attack Pearl Harbor. History records 29 Japanese planes lost that day, shot down, crashed, or destroyed in combat. But what if I told you that's not the complete story? What about the planes that simply vanished? The pilots who radioed mechanical failure and were never seen again? The aircraft that disappeared mid-flight without leaving a single trace? No wreckage, no bodies, no crash sites ever found. This is the story of the Ghost Squadron of Pearl Harbor, a mystery buried in classified files for decades. A phenomenon that left even hardened naval investigators baffled, and a question that still haunts historians today. Where did they go? The Ghost Squadron of Pearl Harbor. Act 1. The attack begins. Chapter 1. First wave launch. December 7th, 1941, 6 a.m. local time. The waters north of Oahu. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida stands on the deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi, watching as the first wave prepares to launch. 183 aircraft in total. 43 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, 51 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, 49 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, and 40 more B-5Ns, armed with armor-piercing bombs. The coordination is flawless. Japan has been planning this attack for months. Every pilot has been hand-selected, every aircraft meticulously maintained, every contingency accounted for. Or so they thought. At 6:15 a.m., the first aircraft lifts off into the pre-dawn darkness. Within 15 minutes, all 183 planes are airborne, forming up in precise attack formations. They head south toward Oahu, flying just above the wave tops to avoid radar detection. But something is already wrong. Lieutenant Fusata Ida, piloting a Zero fighter from the carrier Soryu, radios back to his carrier at 6:32 a.m. His message is brief, routine. Experiencing minor engine vibration, continuing to target. It's the last transmission anyone would ever receive from Lieutenant Ida. But here's what's strange. Ida's plane was never found at Pearl Harbor. It wasn't shot down. It didn't crash into the ocean. It simply ceased to exist. Chapter 2. The disappearances begin. At 6:47 a.m., another anomaly. 3 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, part of the tight formation approaching from the north, suddenly break radio silence. The lead pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Kiyoshi Ogawa, transmits, "Compass malfunction, losing formation. Will attempt to..." The transmission cuts off mid-sentence. The 2 other pilots in his section immediately report the same issue. Their compasses spinning wildly, instruments going haywire. But unlike Ogawa, they manage to correct course and continue to the target. Ogawa's plane is never seen again. Now you might be thinking, mechanical failure happens, planes crash, especially in wartime operations. But here's what makes this different. The weather was perfect that morning. Visibility was excellent. The ocean was relatively calm, and these weren't inexperienced pilots in poorly maintained aircraft. These were elite naval aviators flying brand new planes that had been inspected hours before takeoff. And most puzzling of all, where were the crash sites? When a plane goes down over water, even in the deep ocean, there's debris, oil slicks, wreckage that floats, bodies in life vests, something. But in these cases, nothing. Not a single piece of evidence that these aircraft ever existed, beyond the radio transmissions and the roster logs from that morning. Chapter 3. First wave over target. At 7:48 a.m., Commander Fuchida transmits the famous attack signal, "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The first wave hits Pearl Harbor with devastating precision. Battleship Row erupts in flames. The Arizona explodes. The Oklahoma capsizes. Hickam Field and Wheeler Field are strafed mercilessly. But even in the heat of battle, the disappearances continue. At 8:05 a.m., during the height of the attack, Lieutenant Memori Suzuki, flying a dive bomber targeting the Naval Air Station on Ford Island, radios his squadron leader. Controls unresponsive, instruments dead. I'm going to try to... Static. His wingman, flying just 200 meters away, reports watching Suzuki's plane simply fade from view. Not crash, not explode. The aircraft was there one moment and gone the next. The wingman's report was so bizarre that it was initially dismissed as combat stress. But after the battle, when investigators began piecing together what happened, they found his account corroborated by another pilot who witnessed the same thing. A plane, fully intact, vanishing in mid-air. Act 2. The Second Wave and Mounting Mysteries. Chapter 4. Second Wave Launch. At 7:15 a.m., while the first wave was still en route to target, the second wave launched from the Japanese carriers. 171 aircraft this time, 36 Zeros, 81 dive bombers, and 54 high-level bombers. Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki leads this formation. His orders are clear. Finish what the first wave started. Target any ships that survived. Destroy the repair facilities. Cripple the American Pacific Fleet completely. But as the second wave approaches Oahu at 8:40 a.m., the radio chatter reveals growing confusion. Multiple pilots report compass anomalies, instrument failures, strange atmospheric conditions. One pilot describes his altimeter jumping wildly between readings. Another reports his radio cutting in and out despite clear skies. These aren't isolated incidents anymore, they're becoming a pattern. Chapter 5. The Barber's Point Anomaly. At 8:54 a.m., 6 Aichi D-3A dive bombers break off from the main formation near Barber's Point on the western tip of Oahu. Their target, fuel storage tanks at the Naval Air Station. Leading this section is Lieutenant Akira Sakamoto, an experienced pilot with over 2,000 flight hours. He's flown combat missions over China. He knows his aircraft inside and out. At 8:56 a.m., he transmits to his squadron. Strange interference on instruments. Visibility, unclear. Proceeding to secondary target. His wingman, Lieutenant Takeshi Maida, confirms the same issues but adds something chilling. The water below. It doesn't look right. Something's wrong with. The transmission ends. Of those 6 dive bombers, only 3 reach their target. 3 simply disappear. No Mayday calls. No reports of anti-aircraft fire in that sector. No debris ever found. But here's where it gets truly strange. The 3 planes that DID return reported something even more unsettling. When they looked back toward where their squadron mates had been flying, they saw nothing. Not planes spiraling down, not smoke or fire. The sky was simply empty, as if those aircraft had never existed. One pilot described it like watching someone walk through a door that closed behind them. Chapter 6. American Witnesses. For decades, the American side of this story remained classified. But in 1991, when Pearl Harbor files were finally declassified for the 50th anniversary, something remarkable emerged. American witnesses had seen the same phenomenon. Seaman First Class Robert J. Kinsler was stationed at an anti-aircraft battery on the western coast of Oahu. In his after-action report, filed on December 8th, he describes tracking a group of Japanese aircraft through binoculars when, reading from document, 3 of the enemy planes, flying in tight formation, simply vanished from sight. At first I thought they had dived below my line of sight, but I maintained visual on the area for several minutes. They did not reappear. No explosion was observed, no debris or smoke. The planes were there, and then they were not. Kinsler's report was marked combat stress and filed away. But he wasn't alone. Multiple Navy personnel stationed at different locations around Oahu reported similar sightings. A radar operator at Opana Point noted ghost returns on his scope, aircraft that appeared and disappeared without logical explanation. A pilot from the 47th Pursuit Squadron, engaging Japanese fighters over Kaneohe Bay, reported an enemy Zero fading from existence right in front of him. These reports were all suppressed, labeled unreliable, attributed to the chaos of battle. But what if they were telling the truth? Act 3. The Investigation. Chapter 7. The Initial Cover-Up. In the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor, both the American and Japanese militaries had bigger concerns than mysterious disappearances. The United States had just entered World War II. Japan was consolidating its early victories across the Pacific. But by early 1942, as intelligence officers on both sides began compiling after-action reports, the discrepancies became impossible to ignore. The Japanese Navy reported 29 aircraft lost at Pearl Harbor, but when American investigators counted wrecks, they found only 23 confirmed Japanese aircraft. 6 were unaccounted for. Initially, this was explained away as aircraft that crashed at sea during the return flight. But when the Japanese carriers were recovered after the Battle of Midway in June 1942, American intelligence officers examined the ship's logs, and they discovered something disturbing. The missing aircraft weren't listed as lost on return flight. They were marked as status unknown or disappeared during attack. Some logs simply had names crossed out with no explanation. The Japanese Navy itself didn't know what happened to these planes. Chapter 8. The Electromagnetic Theory. After the war, American naval intelligence launched a quiet investigation into the Pearl Harbor disappearances. The project was classified top secret and codenamed Ghost Squadron. The lead investigator was Commander James Forrestal, a veteran intelligence officer who had spent the war years analyzing Japanese military capabilities. What he uncovered would lead him down a rabbit hole that even he couldn't explain. Forrestal's theory centered on electromagnetic anomalies. The Hawaiian Islands sit atop a massive volcanic hotspot. The Earth's magnetic field in this region is unusually strong and prone to fluctuations. Forrestal theorized that on the morning of December 7, 1941, there may have been an unprecedented electromagnetic event, a magnetic storm of some kind that interfered with aircraft instruments and possibly even caused spatial distortions. It sounds like science fiction, but here's where it gets interesting. The U.S. Geological Survey, when asked to review records from December 7, 1941, found anomalous magnetic readings that morning. Magnetometers on Oahu recorded unusual spikes between 6:30 and 9 a.m., exactly when the disappearances were occurring. Solar weather records show a moderate geomagnetic storm was in progress, and multiple ships in the Pacific reported compass anomalies that day. Could strong electromagnetic fields have caused the aircraft instruments to fail so catastrophically that pilots became disoriented and crashed? Possibly. But that doesn't explain the visual accounts. The witnesses who watched planes vanish in mid-air, the absence of any debris. Forrestal's investigation concluded in 1947 with no definitive answers. His final report stated simply, "The disappearances remain unexplained by conventional means. Further investigation is not recommended given the lack of physical evidence and the classified nature of ongoing research into atmospheric phenomena." That phrase, ongoing research into atmospheric phenomena, is loaded with implications. Chapter 9. The Japanese Perspective. For decades, Japanese veterans of the Pearl Harbor attack remained silent about the disappearances. In Japan's culture of military honor, losing aircraft without explanation was shameful. Speaking about it was taboo, but in the 1980s and 90s, as the generation that fought World War II began to age, some veterans started talking. What they revealed painted an even stranger picture. In a 1989 interview, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the first wave attack, was asked about the missing aircraft. His response was carefully worded. There were incidents during the attack that defied explanation. Planes that should have returned did not. But where they went, this is something I cannot say with certainty. The sea keeps its secrets. When pressed, he added, "Some of my pilots reported things that day, strange things. But in war, men see many things that cannot be explained. Perhaps it is better to let the dead rest." Other veterans were more forthcoming. In a series of interviews conducted by Japanese historian Takashi Yoshida in the 1990s, several Pearl Harbor pilots described instruments going haywire during the attack, compasses spinning like tops, radios cutting in and out despite clear weather, areas of sky that seemed darker or different, planes ahead of them simply blinking out of existence, an overwhelming sense of disorientation in specific areas around Oahu. One pilot, whose name was withheld, described it this way: "It was as if there were holes in the sky, places where the air itself was wrong. I steered my plane away from these areas by instinct. Others were not so fortunate." Act 4. Modern Investigations. Chapter 10. Deep Sea Searches. In 2001, on the 60th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration launched an ambitious project. Map the ocean floor around Oahu using advanced sonar technology. The official purpose was to locate and document the wrecks of American ships sunk during the attack. But there was an unofficial secondary mission: find the missing Japanese aircraft. Over 3 years, survey ships crisscrossed the waters around Oahu, scanning the depths with side-scan sonar and remote-operated vehicles. They found plenty: American aircraft, Japanese mini-submarines, unexploded ordnance, even a B-17 bomber that had crashed while trying to land during the attack. But of the missing Ghost Squadron aircraft, nothing. Dr. Robert Ballard, famous for discovering the Titanic, joined the search in 2003. In an interview with National Geographic, he stated, "We found aircraft that went down more than 80 years ago in far deeper water than this. The ocean floor around Hawaii has been mapped in extraordinary detail. If those planes had crashed anywhere within 100 miles of Oahu, we would have found them. The absence of evidence is itself evidence. Evidence that something very unusual happened to those aircraft." Chapter 11. The Coral Sea Parallel. The Ghost Squadron wasn't an isolated incident, and that's what makes it truly disturbing. During the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, both American and Japanese forces reported aircraft disappearing under similar circumstances. The official records list these as lost on patrol or failed to return, but pilot testimonies describe the same phenomena: instrument failures, radio blackouts, and planes vanishing without a trace. At the Battle of Midway 1 month later, it happened again. At least 4 Japanese aircraft and 2 American planes disappeared under mysterious circumstances that don't match combat losses. And it's not just World War II. Modern military aviation has documented numerous cases of unexplained losses: aircraft that vanish without mayday calls, without debris, without explanation. The Bermuda Triangle gets all the publicity, but similar phenomena have been reported in the Pacific, the South Atlantic, and other regions. The U.S. Navy maintains a classified database called JANAP-146E, Communications Instructions for Reporting Vital Intelligence Sightings. Among the incidents catalogued are unexplained aerial disappearances. How many? The document remains classified. Chapter 12. Modern Theories. So what really happened to the Ghost Squadron of Pearl Harbor? The theories range from the scientific to the speculative. Theory 1. Electromagnetic anomalies. As Commander Forrestal suggested, Unusual electromagnetic conditions could have interfered with aircraft navigation so severely that pilots became completely disoriented, flying erratically until they crashed far from any expected location. The wreckage could lie in deep trenches where it may never be found. Theory 2. Structural failures. Perhaps there was a defect in certain batches of aircraft, a stress fracture in wings or fuselages that caused catastrophic mid-air breakups. The planes would have disintegrated into such small pieces that no significant wreckage field exists. Theory 3. Weather phenomena. Localized atmospheric conditions, microbursts, clear air turbulence, or other weather events could have caused sudden violent crashes. But this doesn't explain the visual accounts of planes vanishing. Theory 4. Cover-up. Some researchers believe the aircraft were shot down by American defenders, but that the incidents were covered up for various reasons. Perhaps the planes were hit in areas where civilian casualties occurred, or evidence of experimental weapons was involved. And then there are the more unconventional theories involving time distortions, dimensional rifts, and phenomena that challenge our understanding of physics itself. I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but I am here to present the facts. Multiple aircraft vanished during the Pearl Harbor attack under circumstances that have never been adequately explained. Credible witnesses on both sides reported seeing planes disappear. Extensive searches have found no wreckage, and official investigations have concluded with no definitive answers. Conclusion. The Ghost Squadron of Pearl Harbor remains one of World War II's most enduring mysteries. Somewhere out there, in the deep waters off Oahu, in classified military archives, or perhaps in dimensions we don't yet understand, the answer exists. But until that answer is found, the fate of those pilots and their aircraft remains unknown. We remember Pearl Harbor as a day of infamy, a day that thrust America into World War II. We remember the nearly 2,400 Americans who died. We honor their sacrifice, but we should also remember the other lost souls from that day. The Japanese pilots who never returned home, who vanished into mystery, who became ghosts, not in the metaphorical sense, but perhaps quite literally. December 7th, 1941, was a day when the impossible happened, when war came to American shores, when the world changed forever. But for some, it was the day they flew into the unknown and never came back. This has been the story of the Ghost Squadron of Pearl Harbor. The mystery endures.